Right, okay, folks, welcome back. Another installment of the Non-Profit Diaries. Again, this time doing an interview with an expert in the non-profit sector. So this time around, we are talking about incorporating social media into your non-profit business plan. I'll explain why I want to cover this in a minute, but let's jump straight into it with the introduction. So my guest today is Julia Campbell. Julia is a digital strategist for non-profit organisations and the founder of Campbell Social Marketing, where she consults and trains non-profits on how to develop digital strategies and tools for more effective fundraising and brand marketing. She's the author of Storytelling in the Digital Age, a guide for non-profits, and more recently, how to build and mobilise a social media community for your non-profit in 90 days. And her website can be found at jcsocialmarketing.com. So Julia Campbell, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks, Danny. I'm really excited to be here.
Okay, so a couple of reasons I wanted to reach out to you. One is, I guess, so I've already done an interview with a guy called Campbell on fundraising, and yes. one of the things that sort of came up there was we were talking about old media, new media, and how to sort of incorporate that. Ken was talking obviously primarily in the fundraising sector, but I was talking about how I wanted to sort of mobilize social media to sort of tell our story. So I've already mentioned on the podcast before, I won't go into it in too much detail, but I've got experience in podcasting and doing a bit of YouTube. And then we launched this foundation. COVID-19 comes in, lockdown. We can't go out. We can't network. What do we do? So it's like, well, let's just create some content and sort of tell our story. But Ken was very sort of skeptical of that. He says, you can't take likes to the bank. It's not worth very much. And I'm sort of on board with him a little bit. Like, even though this feels like a good idea to tell our story, to try and get people involved, because obviously there's other forms of involvement rather than just getting people to hand over money. People can volunteer, researchers can get involved, those sorts of things. You can mobilize people in that way. But I agree with him. I'm still skeptical, and I'm still skeptical specifically about particular social platforms. Twitter, Facebook, I can't get into it. I don't get it. And maybe it's my age. I don't know. YouTube, podcasting, I'm all about it. So I'm hoping you can sort of help us pass out what's worthwhile, what's not, and maybe put a bit of some general rules for people putting a social media strategy together, I guess. So, but before,
that's a lot.
Yeah, it is a lot.
I'll do my best.
But before we jump into
I love Ken Burnett, by the way. I'm a big fan of his.
Oh, cool. Okay. So before we jump into everything, though, tell us a little bit about you and your history, and specifically how you became the social media person, because it's obviously must be a bit of a new job that didn't exist 20 years ago. So how did that come about?
Well, my husband and I always joke that I invented my job, and that's why it will hopefully always be safe, because I can just reinvent it. I don't have anyone to really answer to other than my clients and my students. I started my nonprofit journey really in high school. I volunteered. I was hugely into social justice issues in high school, all through college, worked in nonprofits. And I served in the United States Peace Corps. I served in West Africa for 2.5 years. And I worked with a lot of NGOs and charities there, doing health prevention kind of work and malaria prevention, STD prevention, that kind of thing. And when I came home, I made the decision to become a development director, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners are into development or marketing. We all have the titles and the labels that we follow in the sector. So I've basically experienced every aspect of the nonprofit sector except executive director. So I've been an intern, a program director, development marketing, and board member and donor. And I was actually laid off from my nonprofit development job when I was 8 months pregnant with my daughter, who's now 10.
Yep.
It was horrific then, but it was the best thing that ever happened. I try to talk to people now when they're being laid off and furloughed and encourage them to, see it as an opportunity. And I know that's really challenging, but what I found was that I was younger then, 10 years ago, people were turning to me and saying, what's going on with social media? Facebook was just emerging, Twitter, Instagram, all of these channels were really kind of taking fire, and a lot of people were talking about them. What I think happened was 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, nonprofits were sold a bill of goods around social media. So what happened was that Facebook said, oh, let's all get on the platform and let's create Facebook pages, and emails declining. So, you can reach all your fans on Facebook. As we know, with the algorithms, with organic reach plummeting, with it being harder and harder to actually gain traction and grow an audience on social media, that is not necessarily true anymore. So, the way I think about it, I believe that nonprofits can build communities on social media. So my consulting business has changed a lot into active management, into more strategy. How can social media be part of your digital ecosystem that includes your website, that includes your donation page, that includes your email, that includes your direct mail, that includes events, virtual events, maybe in-person events if you're in a particular part of the world that's opening up. So how can social media augment what you're doing but not replace what you're doing?
Right. Well, that's a perfect segue into my first question, really, and it's why, and especially in light of what you've just said about it, social media changing from these organic platforms to this paved for exposure type platforms. Why does social media matter? Why should it matter? And especially to nonprofits in particular?
I think it's interesting. The platforms themselves are always changing, but social media itself represents a complete and total revolution in the way human beings interact and in the way that humans find and share information. So I don't think that we can deny the impact that social media platforms have had on humanity, good or bad. We can argue and debate that all day. And the interesting thing that you brought up about Ken Burnett, and I've had this debate, trust me, on Twitter, on Facebook, I've had this debate many times with a lot of the, I wouldn't say old school, but maybe the more traditional leaning fundraisers. And I think what they don't understand is that old media versus new media, it's kind of a moot point, because the youth of today, they're growing up on their phones and their iPads. They are not the people that are going to be sending in your checks. They are not the people that are going to be going to your event and buying a table at your corporate event. So if we're looking forward to the future, we need to have in our periphery these platforms that are changing all the time, which I know can be scary and daunting and really intimidating to kind of follow and figure out which is the best platform to jump on right now. But I think the debate is really moot, because these platforms are here. 2 billion people are on Facebook. There's millions of people using these platforms every single day, especially younger generations, and which platforms they're using change all the time. But I don't think the debate over, whether or not we should use it. I think it's how can we use it in the best way possible to grow our audience base, to reach new donors, to reach new supporters, without losing the fundamental principles of fundraising, which include understanding our audience, being able to convey a compelling message, having a very clear and concise call to action. All of those things you absolutely still have to have, no matter which platform you use. So I think it's interesting to have this conversation right now, because in the light of coronavirus, I have seen so many nonprofits almost eschewing social media because it's getting so toxic. So I'm almost more interested in, can we take it back? Can we have these really great conversations with our supporters? Can we change hearts and minds around issues that are so important to us? And I don't necessarily have the answer there. But the other point I wanted to make is that nonprofits are raising millions of dollars on Facebook alone. So we can't turn our back on the fact that it seems like millions of people want to give on this platform. You need to make a decision for yourself and for your organization, whether ethically you think it's right to use Facebook. There's that huge ad boycott going on right now. I don't know if you know about it. In the United States, I think it's international, where I've been a part of a lot of these discussions. And organizations really need to take a hard look at their policies and see, do we want to continue paying Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp and their, ecosystem of services if we disagree with the fundamental way they run their business? These are all really interesting conversations that I don't necessarily have the answer to. But what I do know is that donors like giving on Facebook, people like fundraising on Facebook, people around the world really enjoy expressing what they stand for and their worldview and their identity and their ethics and their values on these platforms. And how can nonprofits be a part of this conversation? And that's really what I try to impart in a lot of my teaching.
Yeah, it's sort of a very general claim, though, isn't it, that people are giving money to nonprofits on Facebook. People like giving money.
Well, not everyone. You can't say everyone likes everything.
No, but that's not the generality I was more concerned with. Is whether whether that's the nature of the nonprofit, because especially with things like Facebook, Facebook strikes me as this place where people just sort of scroll, the derping away scrolling, scroll, and I just wonder whether the connection that you're making with people on places like Facebook is a very shallow connection, and that when it comes to people actually handing over money on Facebook, which is necessarily a deeper connection, I can see that for, when you've got one of these charities like I saw an advert the other day where there's some disease in Africa, I think, that kids get, where it sort of inverts their eyelids so that every time they blink, it's like scraping their eyes, and it looks horrendous, and you're like, oh my God, where's my wallet? So that's understandable, and you see that on Facebook. But then when you get a non-profit that's maybe the thing that they're doing isn't quite as graphic or as harsh,
or sexy, quote unquote,
yes,
or as eye-catching,
especially eye-catching, then do you think that there's the same place for those non-profits, or is Facebook really just the place for those sort of visually striking messages?
That's a great question. I've seen really tiny local nonprofits raise thousands of dollars on Facebook, and it's because they know exactly who to target. So they're not trying to target everyone. So there's a little museum where I live. It's called the Wenham Museum. I live in a town of 4,000 people. And the only people that care about this museum are probably the people where I live and maybe people that have moved away.
Right.
And they did a fundraiser because they were honestly going to have to close their doors because of COVID-19, because they have a lot of elementary school groups that come in, and they run a lot of educational tours, and they do a lot of work with senior centers, things that obviously can't be done in person right now. And they ran a campaign, and people were just so passionate about this community museum. I know that I'm really passionate about it. So the way they did is they targeted the right people. They know they're not going to raise millions of dollars. They're not going to get on the news. They aren't going to reach a celebrity because it's just not the nature of who they are. So I think if nonprofits have reasonable expectations and they can really engage the people that truly do care about the cause and get them to tell other people, that's the power of social media. The power of social media does not come from the nonprofit itself. It comes from the people that are willing and able to spread the word for the nonprofit to their networks, to their friends, to their family. And I think that's where nonprofits and charities really get mixed up, because they think it's a billboard. They think we can just post our stuff and it's our agenda and everyone's going to like it. It's kind of like a website. And it's not. It's really meant to generate conversation and debate. Nonprofits are terrified of debate. They're terrified of being provocative. They're terrified of having anyone say anything that is in any way negative, or I would even say maybe interesting. So that's the real challenge. And it's the organizations that truly make that connection with even a tiny, tiny community of people. Those are the ones that really succeed. And, it definitely is difficult. It's an uphill battle. I mean, I work with organizations all day and I do audits and assessments, and I do coaching and workshops. And what always strikes them is that, oh, wow, this is a lot of work. And I always say it is a lot of work because it's building a community. I don't think that it's effective to spend a ton of money on Facebook ads and just kind of spray your message out to a bunch of strangers. That's not going to help you build your sustainability long term. But it's definitely a lot more work than people think. And whether or not you have the capacity to do so, you have to completely evaluate that on yourself, evaluate that for your organization and, what you have the capacity to do. And certainly it's not for everyone. And Danny, I wanted to point out something that you said. I tell organizations that if you are the person that's going to run the social media accounts and you hate social media, it's not going to work.
Right.
It just will not work. It's sort of like if you hate email, and you are running the email marketing, or if you hate calling donors and you're the person fundraising, it's not going to work. So you need to get someone that is not necessarily in love with the platforms, but maybe interested or curious, or has some kind of, way that they can reconcile marketing and fundraising and still using these platforms. So if you hate it, it's not going to work.
Well, that's a good point. I was going to bring this up later, but I'll jump on it now, actually. So this idea of finding somebody to engage with social media, and for me, like I say, it's not that like I hate Facebook and Twitter and things like that. I just it just doesn't do anything for me. I just can't get into it. I feel like I don't get it, and I feel
you save lots of time, I'm sure.
Well, I mean, yeah, there is that benefit to it, but I'm imagining it can be quite a hard sell to get a non-profit to say to them, look, you need to hire somebody to do this. And I can understand your position as somebody that's like a consultant and a strategist in this, where you're reaching out to different organizations, but is engaging on Facebook and Twitter and social media, is that really a full-time job? Can you really justify spending like thousands of pounds on getting somebody to sit in the office and do that?
So the first thing I want to say is that I feel like I am oftentimes a therapist. I'm a social media therapist. Right. So very often I talk people out of it. Okay. They'll contact me and they'll say, I am a one-person shop. I just started. I have zero capacity. I'm working 90 hours a week, and I feel like I need to start a Facebook fundraiser. That happens to me pretty frequently. And I will say, no, like, I think you need to focus on XYZ, these other things first, maybe build up your board, build up your donor base. Right. Then if you love social media and you're on it already, then try to build up your following. But I would never encourage an organization to stop doing something that's working and transition over to something that is not necessarily proven.
Okay.
On the other hand, I worked with the Center Street Food Pantry in Newton, near where I live. They have a part-time executive director. So she's 20 hours a week. She does everything. She's the executive director. She does all of the management of the food pantry. There's no other staff. She does any fundraising that needs to be done, grants. She manages the board. She loves Instagram. She just happens to really like it. She's younger and she's like a really cool lady. And she just said, you know what? I love Instagram. I'm on Instagram all the time. So why don't I document, right? We talked about that earlier, the Gary V quote. Why don't I just document what's going on rather than worrying about creating a bunch of perfect content for Instagram? And she said, I'm just going to do it a month. For 1 month, I'm going to post every day. I'm just going to pick something to post, write a little short caption. It's going to take me 5 minutes a day and then see what happens. And she ended up tripling her following. And then a lot of those people ended up inquiring about being volunteers or being donors, or if she even got a board member from that, because she just knew how to use it and she liked using it. So I think if you can incorporate it into your day like that, maybe pick just one platform and say, well, I like Instagram. I'm already in the food pantry anyway. I might as well just take a picture of what's going on. Or I'm already, dropping off bags of groceries to this school anyway. I might as well just take a picture. So that's how she thought about it. And it really worked out for her. I don't think you need a full-time person. And I also do not recommend outsourcing it. So for me, I don't manage social media accounts. I will give you the plan and a to-do list, but I'm not going to actually manage it because I don't think it's effective to outsource it. And all of my friends that work at marketing agencies are going to hate me saying that. But I just think you need to be in it. You need to be in the work. You need to be, you need to be in the field or behind the scenes, or even if you're just doing Zoom calls all day, it seems to me that it's so much more genuine when you get the stories that are, from the front lines. So I really don't recommend outsourcing it. I recommend doing what you can do and doing it consistently, which is also key. So another point that I want to make is that social media is like exercise, right? You can't have one salad and then say, oh man, I didn't lose 20 pounds, so I'm not going to have salad anymore. That's not how losing weight works, right? You need to be consistent. You need to have a plan. You need to have a strategy. You need to be focused. You need to change your habits. So with social media, what I see all the time is, oh, well, I used Instagram for 1 week and then, I don't really know what happened with it. Well, okay, you have to be very consistent. You also have to understand and know what your goals are and what does success look like for using these channels.
What would you say about choosing a platform then? Let's say instead of going to either extreme where you've got one person with no budget versus like an organization with millions to spend, let's say you've got a mid-sized organization with some time to dedicate and a small budget to dedicate to social media. Sort of harking back to what we were saying before about some charities championing causes that are sort of very visually striking. How would you go about choosing which platforms to adopt and how many to adopt as well? Because, like, just for an example, you mentioned the Gary Vee quote, "The document, don't create," and we'll get back to that. But one of the things he says is sign up to everything and post on everything. And to me, that sort of strikes me as a bit sort of unrealistic and a bit annoying and a bit shallow as well. So
he has a team managing his account.
Yes, he does. That's the other thing. So easy for him to say. But yeah, how would, taking the nature of the nonprofit into consideration, how do you choose which platforms to dedicate your time to?
Well, there's several ways to go about this. Number one, figure out your goal. So what are you trying to accomplish and who are you trying to reach? If you're trying to reach teenagers, then you don't want to be on Facebook. Like if you're DoSomething.org, or if you are, To Write Love on Her Arms, which is a suicide prevention and addiction recovery organization that targets teens and college students, you're probably not going to be on Facebook. So understand the demographic that you're trying to attract, the audience you're trying to build. And then if you want to use it to reach your existing audience, I would ask them. I would send out a survey. I would talk to your donors. I would see what platforms they're using. So it's pretty safe to assume that if you're targeting baby boomers, they're on Facebook. A lot of baby boomers, millennials, Gen X, depending on the generation, are on Instagram. If you're trying to build up your board, maybe you're trying to recruit board members and volunteers, LinkedIn is a great place for that. So the very first question you do need to ask is, what are we trying to accomplish and who are we trying to attract? Those are the two first questions I would ask. Then you need to really evaluate, how much time do I have to dedicate to this? If you only have an hour a week, that's going to be challenging to manage more than 2 platforms, because we have to understand the work of social media is not just posting and leaving. Really, it's posting and then figuring out what works, looking at engagement numbers, seeing, did people actually go to our website? Did they actually make a donation? Did they sign up for our email list? Did they attend our event? What were the results of some of the things that we posted? And then how can we iterate and improve what we're doing? The other important point that I always make is that social media as itself, it's not monolithic. It's not like you can have a social media strategy to cover all the platforms, because what you share on TikTok is very different from what you share on LinkedIn.
Right.
So you need an individual strategy for each platform. Like you have a website strategy, you have a direct mail strategy, you have an event strategy, you have to have a platform, individual platform strategy. And maybe you just want to use Instagram. Maybe you're very visually appealing. If you are a visually appealing organization and you have lots of great photos and stories to share, I would really recommend Instagram. That's what it's for. But if you're only going to post flyers or boring photos, or you don't have any photos to share, then I really wouldn't recommend using that platform.
Right.
So every platform needs to be evaluated for its individual strengths and weaknesses. It's sort of like, if I'm going to Germany, I wouldn't buy a guidebook for Iceland because it just wouldn't work. So we need to really focus on goals, audience, objectives, and what are the strengths and weaknesses, and how can we reach our audience? And that's why it's very challenging, because what happens is you go to a board meeting, your board member says, we need to be on Pinterest or we need to be on Snapchat. So you need to be able to ask these questions, sort of like, what do we hope to achieve on Snapchat? Who's our audience? What kind of content are we going to create? Who's going to do this? What time is required to actually create and build an audience on this platform? So creating an individual strategy for each platform, it could be one page. It doesn't have to be your strategic plan that is probably 12 pages long, just a few notes, but understanding that, it is a lot of work. I would think of it like blogging. It's as much work as blogging. It's as much work as building up your email list, building up your donor file, getting people to come to events. And that goes back to the bill of goods that we were sold, where everyone thinks, oh, it's free, it's easy, we'll just post some things and the donations will roll in. And we've all realized that's not the case.
Yeah, so I guess having to encouraging people to take this seriously, I guess, as a part of their business strategy. Because like you just said then, that's a common thing people will say is, we need to be on Facebook. It's like all the kids are doing Twitter, all the kids are doing Instagram. We need to be on Instagram. But it's like, well, no, not necessarily. You know what I mean? Just because all the cool kids are on there, you do need to take the time to sort of seriously consider the weigh up the benefits and the type of audience. Like, it's interesting what you said with Facebook. I mean, I have got a Facebook account because we've got a page for the foundation, but back when I was actively using Facebook, that was back in like 2008, something like that. When it's
changed a lot.
Yeah, when
the demographics.
Totally, all the cool kids used to be on Facebook, and now it's like Grandma Central on there.
It's Grandma Central. It is. Yeah, no, it totally is.
So quickly, before I jump into this next question, if you just expand on this Gary Vee concept of document versus create, because we've mentioned it, I know what you mean, you know what you mean, but people listening to it might be like, what does that mean? So if you expand on that, and then I've got a question sort of related to that.
Okay. Well, with the phrase document, don't create, it just means don't get hung up on your perfect content calendar where everything has to be highly polished, produced. You have to hire a video company. You have to have all this lighting and all this equipment. Everything has to be perfect. So social media right now, and even for the last few years, authenticity and in the moment has really meant a lot more than that polished kind of perfect looking presence. So for nonprofits, what I would love to see them doing more of is to tell me what's going on today. What's going on today, especially in the pandemic, because things change day to day to day to day. Are you opening? How are you opening? What is your staff doing? What are your clients doing? What's going on with your community partners? How are you working to ensure that people are returning to work safely? I'm interested in all of these conversations. I want to know from my nonprofits, what do I need to know? What's going on in your daily life? It could be an Instagram story where you're sitting at your desk and you're saying, oh, we're supposed to be opening this week, but we just got notice from the governor that we can't. Here's what we're going to do. Here's the 5 steps that we're going to take. We're just really excited to reopen. I mean, that's documenting. That's not working for 5 weeks on a storyboard of a video.
Yeah.
Or hiring a professional photographer. So when Gary Vee says document, don't create, it really stuck with me because I thought there's a time for creation, right? There's a time, of course. If it's your 50th anniversary gala, you're going to spend some money making a nice video. And if it's, there's just time. There's time for creation. But for social media, because the beast always needs to be fed, you're not going to have time and resources to do that perfect, produced, polished post every single time.
Yep.
So don't think that you have to. And just understand that your audience wants to hear from you. You're the go-to resource. You are the go-to resource for this problem, for this particular issue. And if I'm your donor, I want to know what's going on with the problem. How do you see coronavirus affecting it? How do you see the state of the world affecting it? What's the future? And how can I help? And how have my donations made an impact? And how can my donations make an impact? So rather than that perfect calendar that's very like every day is a perfect post, try to get out of that and try to kind of like go by the seat of your pants a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that quote stuck with you. The one that stuck with me, which is sort of related to that, was I remember he once said, "Great content is the truth, not the lighting." And I was like, oh, that's brilliant. That one changed the old podcast that I used to do. I was really hung up on the video side of it, wanting to get like the perfect video and like the lighting and be in a studio and everything. And then he said that, and it was just like, just get the job done and put the content out. And I was like, you know what, you're right. Which is why you joined me in my scruffy living room today. But related to that, Julia, and I think it's quite an interesting point really, is one of the things people make fun of social media about is people share like the sort of the asinine and the boring aspects of the life. It's, people make fun of like Twitter and say, why would I care what someone's having for the tea? Do you know what I mean? People post the food pictures on Instagram, or people want to moan about, they tried taking their grandma to the shop and like a skirt fell off or something like that. And it's like, why do I care about this sort of thing? And so for a non-profit that decides to take up that particular ethos, like, okay, let's start producing content and just document what we're doing. One of the things that you mention a lot on your website is this idea of storytelling. Mm-hmm. How do you know when you're telling a story and just boring people with like the day-to-day minutiae of what you do? Because again, it might be tricky to make that distinction, because things might be interesting to you as part of that day-to-day running of the non-profit, but not necessarily interesting to an audience. So how do you make that distinction of what to put out there?
You're going to get real-time feedback on whatever you put out there.
Right.
So if you're posting on Instagram, you will know which photos very quickly get 10 likes and which ones get 100 likes. And it's up to you to really analyze that and see what your audience wants, and also talk to them, really understand and focus on what they want to hear from you. And also the platform it varies via platform. So Instagram stories and Facebook stories are much more off the cuff. It's like the B-roll that you're shooting. If you're shooting a video, it's your B-roll, it's your extras, it's your outtakes, because they disappear after 24 hours. I do think your feed should be pretty high quality, and that doesn't mean it has to be by a professional photographer, but it should be at least a little bit more intentional and thoughtful. The stories that you tell reflect what you do and the world that you're trying to create. So a story has stakes. It makes me care about the person that you're talking about. It really could be 2 or 3 sentences, but there has to be some kind of conflict there. There has to be a hook. There has to be a reason for me to care. So for me, I mean, anytime I'm communicating with my audience, I always ask myself, why now and why this? Why would they care? Because it's a value exchange. They give you their time and attention, and you give them something that's valuable. Maybe it just makes them smile. Maybe it's just a little happy story about something that happened at your organization that's going to make them smile. Maybe it's a heart-wrenching, emotional, compelling story that's going to make them take out their wallet and donate. Maybe it is a thank you to a corporate sponsor that's going to be very inspiring and encourage more people to come on board. So just be intentional and thoughtful about what you're posting. Don't just throw things up, because you're asking for someone's attention every time you post. And what the algorithms do is they see that. They see, oh, if you keep asking for attention, but no one's really giving it to you, then we're not going to show your posts to as many people because they're probably not relevant and they're probably not timely. Stories work best on social media. That's why people joined social networks in the first place. That's why people joined Facebook. That's why they joined Instagram. That's why they joined Twitter. They want to hear stories, to tell stories, to connect with friends and family, to learn about causes they care about, but it's all about storytelling. And I think we got mixed up somewhere along the line where we thought of these platforms as free promotional platforms,
right,
or free advertising platforms, but they're not. They're really storytelling platforms. If you can tell me a great story, even just in a photo and a quote, that is always going to get the most engagement.
Yeah, sort of. I think a potential downside to that is getting pulled in the wrong direction, which is a particular risk, I guess, to non-profit. It's very easy to destroy your reputation. And so I'm just...
Well, everything is political now.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter what you do. You're going to have haters and trolls and people writing horrible things on your page. It's always going to happen.
Well, I'm just sort of spitballing here. It might not be a perfect example, but say somebody's on Instagram and they're posting pictures. They're trying different content out, a little bit of, office drama, something from a meeting, and then say it's a charity that helps homeless people or something like that, and then you've got some content going out on the streets where you're filming someone that's homeless and needs help or whatever, and your office drama gets 25 likes, and your little bit of a meeting with a boss or whatever, that gets 50 likes, but then this clip of being out on the streets gets thousands of likes, and it's like, okay, so that's engaging content to people. That's the sort of stuff people are interested in. But like what happens with a lot of, especially these young YouTubers, is you can inadvertently fall into this sort of exploitative arena where, before you know it, you're sort of sticking a camera in every homeless person's face and trying to use them to fuel your fundraising drive or whatever. And I'm just wondering what the balancing act is there. And it's a tricky one because, it's telling the truth of the story. It's showing the people that need help, but this becomes a certain sort of ickiness to it at a certain level. So how do you deal with that? Not get pulled in the wrong direction?
You have to have the protocols and procedures set in place and be very explicit and clear, and have everyone on your staff be on the same page. So an example would be Best Friends Animal Society, where they have a policy where they never post a picture of an animal that's beat up or abused or bloody or disfigured. They only share the success stories. They tell a little bit in the story of this animal was found in a dumpster and, was horrifically abused, but they never show the picture. But then PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, that's what they do because that's what their audience responds to. That's their mission. That's their sort of, MO. That's what they do. They want to incite people to be angry and horrified, and they want to provoke people. So I think you have to be very clear and consistent on which one are you going to be. Like, are you going to be PETA, which may have some ethical considerations around that? Or are you going to be Best Friends Animal Society? And they're very clear and consistent in that they're not going to shy away from the hard stories, but they are not exploiting their animals. And I can give you so many examples of organizations that deal with sex trafficking, that deal with rape crisis, domestic violence, that take the tact that Best Friends Animal Society does, where they're very explicit and clear that the stories they share have to go through multiple approval processes. They have to get release forms, and they're only going to share a certain kind of story. So you definitely have to be aware of mission drift, aware of, poverty porn, as it's called. When you're doing storytelling, you have to have ethical considerations in place and all sorts of safeguards in place. So I think it's very easy to do that, but I also think that the organizations that have a consistent and sustainable following really understand their voice, and they understand what they're trying to convey, and they stay away from being exploitative.
Okay, sort of related to that, I guess, is what would you say are, I don't know, maybe 3 or 5 of sort of common mistakes that people make when they first, well, not necessarily when they first engage in social media, but just in general, where you maybe, especially when you're going around and to these nonprofits to help them put strategies together, what are like some common things you sit down and you're like, oh God, I wish you hadn't have done this, or those sorts of things?
Yes. So when I do my audits and my assessments, I see the same things almost all the time. Number one is simply posting promotional content. Yes. So promoting your events, promoting your fundraising, promoting volunteer sign up, I don't know, posting a flyer. So exclusively promoting, and not trying to tell stories of accomplishments and impact and showcasing achievements, and not really trying to build a community around the issue, just simply pushing out promotions. The second big mistake I see is automating and pushing the same content, kind of cutting and pasting it across all of the channels. Yeah. So you can repurpose it. You can, if you have a great story about an animal you've rescued or a person that you've helped, you can put it on all your channels, but just don't cut and paste it, because Twitter is 280, characters for a caption. Instagram is 2,200. LinkedIn is very different. Facebook, you can't have 30 hashtags. It looks crazy. So I think that if you have this great piece of content, you do have to make the effort to individually post it to each channel. And I would say the third pitfall that not many people understand is that the more you post outside links, the less likely you are to get engagement. Because what we need to really remember at the end of the day, social media platforms are businesses. Yep. They answer to their stakeholders, then they answer to their users, then they answer to us. We're like the third on the totem pole for who they care about. So if you're posting an outside link, they don't want to drive their users to outside websites. So the more you can use their tools or put your video inside the platform rather than posting a YouTube video link, for example, the more you can actually post inside the platform, the better. I'm not saying never share links, but certainly not with every post. There have to be some links. There have to be some posts that are just a photo, maybe a story, or a video and a caption, or maybe just some text and a great graphic to go with it. Because like I said, the platforms don't play nicely with each other, and Facebook doesn't want to send traffic to YouTube. LinkedIn doesn't want to send traffic to the New York Times because it sends people off their website. So as much as you can create content that's internal and lives in the site, the better.
Right. Okay. One as well is, I was thinking about this, is it seems to be that early adopters of a platform sort of almost automatically turn out to be the ones that have a lot of success on that platform, because it's sort of it's cheap real estate, I guess. Back in the days of when Twitter first came out, there was a few people using it. And I remember sort of famously, it was like, oh, Ashton Kutcher was on Twitter, which was like a weird thing for a celebrity to do. But as a result of it, I think he was like the first person to pass 1 million Twitter followers or something. I might be conflating the names and the personalities.
Like when Jennifer Aniston joined Instagram. Yeah, it's like that.
And so there's one of the things about these social media platforms is they do taper off and die. Like I remember MySpace. And
and Friendster.
Yeah, well, the idea when I was on MySpace, the idea that another platform was going to come along like Facebook and get rid of it, it was ridiculous. MySpace had taken over the world, and I always just imagine this. You know, if Mark Zuckerberg would have gone on Dragon's Den or Shark Tank, as you guys call it, and at the time of MySpace and gone, I've got this idea, right? It's a social network where you add friends and you talk to people and you put a little bio and it's like, yeah, we've got MySpace. Do you know what I mean? And MySpace is going nowhere. But he
was smart because he started out with colleges.
He did.
So he started, I actually think I've just read an amazing expose by Stephen Levy on Facebook. It's not good. It doesn't paint a good picture of Facebook.
Right.
But the way he started was so smart because he started really small with these communities that thought they were exclusive. So it was like Harvard, and then it was Yale, and then it was like all
Stanford.
These colleges. Yeah. So everyone was like, oh, well, it's only colleges now. So it started out as this thing where it was exclusive. Yeah. But of course now it's not.
Yeah. The point I'm trying to get at is when do you think is a good time to sort of adopt a platform? Because if you're going to become the A+K, the Ashton Kutcher of Twitter, you need to jump on the bandwagon quickly. But at the same time, you could be jumping on one of these platforms that's ultimately going to be a waste of time and die a death. And then you've invested all that time and wasted it. But then if you wait too long, when the Instagrams come along, they've already got their 1 million followers and you're just going to struggle in the maelstrom. So what's the strategy there, do you think?
That's a tough one. You have to evaluate, how much time do you really have to dedicate to these shiny new tools that keep popping up? I know there's some kind of I keep getting invitations to these platforms that are alternatives to Facebook, and I just don't see anybody really truly taking it on. And I also don't have any more time in my day, so I just ignore them. But something like a TikTok, where people are spending 10 hours a day on TikTok, like I don't think that's okay. But people are really, it's so easy right now to build a platform on TikTok because it's, like you said, cheap real estate. It's growing, it's the fastest growing. But also if it doesn't serve your goals, then don't do it. Like if you're not trying to reach teenagers, if you're not trying to reach younger people, if you don't have anything that's visual or very video related, then that's not the platform for you. So you do have to evaluate it on, where is your audience? Is your audience telling you about this? Are they all emailing you and saying, oh, Pinterest is the cool new platform? But it's completely impossible to be able to predict the future of any of these sites. So what I always encourage people to do is really build up your email list, build up your donor file, and use social media to kind of feed people, hopefully, to both of those things, because you control your email list, you control your donor file. If Facebook closed tomorrow, then you would be, and you built your entire audience and your whole life is on Facebook, then you are out of luck. But if you have a website that you control, if you have an email list that you control, if you have that donor file that you can bring with you and control, then you're not building your house on rented land. Because that's a really good point. We really have no idea if some of these platforms might go to payment. Maybe you need a subscription. Maybe everyone's going to leave Facebook because of all the horrible press lately. We just don't know.
Okay, well, sort of related to that, what would you say to somebody for what's a basic strategy to build an audience from scratch? Say your first 1,000 followers or your first 100 followers, because the way we're talking now, we're sort of presupposing there's a ready-made audience there. And in the example of being, say, an early adopter of Twitter, you're more likely to get those first few followers just through people sort of tokenistically following each other because it's a small platform. But on an established platform, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, what have you, you've signed up, you've got your little you got your handle, you put your little profile photo up. Good for you. No one knows you're there. Do you know what I mean? And especially, and I'm going to make it even more difficult for you because I'm gonna take away the email marketing list from you. So obviously, with an email marketing list, you can say to people, "Well, tell them by email." But let's say this is a small startup organization. They set up the Twitter and the Facebook. No one's there. Nobody cares. What do you do to get those first 100 or first 1,000 followers?
Well, I mean, I did this with a Facebook group that now has 11,000 members.
Wow.
So I started a Facebook group. I actually just recently really started like ramping it up. So that's why it like doubled followers in the last year. But you're just consistent. You have to just be consistent. So you have to also post great content. You can't get away from that. So you have to post something that's interesting. And I would maybe spend a little money on Facebook ads. So $10 here, $20 there to try to target people that have interests that you're trying to attract. So you want to be very clear on the audience you're trying to attract to you. It's not everybody under the sun, because you want to attract people that are going to eventually become donors, eventually become supporters. So if you're local, I would connect with other pages. I would try to see if you could post on their pages.
Right.
I would follow as many people as you can. I would tag people. I wouldn't spam people.
What's the distinction there? What's the distinction between posting on other people's pages and
so
a
spam post would be like on Twitter. This just happened to me today. A nonprofit posted its fundraising link, and it just tagged me in it.
Right.
And I was like, "What? I don't know what to do with that." But if someone's reposting my blog and tagging me or asking me a question and saying, "Julia, we're struggling with our Facebook fundraising. What do you recommend? Here's a link to it." I'm much more likely to take a look at it. So that's more genuine interaction. It takes more time.
Yeah.
Spamming takes no time at all. That's why everyone does it. It's cheap. It takes no time, but it's not effective. And I just will ignore it. It's almost like those mass emails that you get where you can tell you're on an email list that's been purchased, and you just think, oh, well, I'm not going to respond to anything like that. I also would work on, even just if you have 2 or 3 people that are invested in this nonprofit with you, get them to invite their friends and family on board, because the more people you can invite, the more the snowball will kind of get rolling. So I think a good example of this is I don't know if you know of the Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. I saw the 2 founders of this book, the 2 writers of this book. So they wanted to start a Kickstarter campaign to get this book published, but they had literally absolutely no audience. And it was just the 2 of them. And they thought, we want to write this book. We have no idea where to start. They sent out 20 emails each to their network. And they said, could you each send out 5 emails each? And then from those people, it just was almost like a chain letter.
Yeah.
And it really worked. And it really built up their email list. And then they had a Facebook page. They have an Instagram account. Now they have millions of followers. But they started from scratch. I mean, I do think you can do it if you have a good idea, if you have a good cause, and if you can attract the right people to tell other people. And that's the key. You can't just do it yourself. You can't just have a billboard. You can't just have a Facebook page. It's really trying to get other people to spread the word for you.
Yeah, I think just as an observer of this, 2 of the things you've mentioned is the consistency thing. So I've worked for a non-profit in the past. Well, two of the sins that you mentioned. One was they only ever posted when it was like, give us something. So here's a fundraiser. They ask people to do something without providing any value beforehand. And the other thing was just doing it sort of inconsistently. And not just from an algorithmic perspective, but when you've got a charity that you look at the past 5 posts and it's June, February, November, it makes the organization look like a dead organization.
And no one sees those posts because Facebook sees that. Facebook's like, they only message every 6 months. So really the anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt, but the platforms notice that.
Yeah, but but for the people that do stumble across that Facebook page or that Twitter page, especially, if they've got a link on their website and that says we've got a Twitter page, and you go there and they've hardly ever posted it, it's like, does anyone even work at this place? Are you guys even doing anything?
It's better to take it down. It's better to pause it. Don't put it on your website. Wait until you can maybe ramp it up again. I completely agree with you. It's like a ghost town.
But on the flip side of that, when you see organizations or individuals commenting in different threads on Twitter and Facebook, that makes the organization look alive. And like you say, not just spamming, saying, oh yeah, we're doing this, like send us some money, but just leaving a comment, just passing their opinion to somebody else. That has the opposite effect. It's like, oh, these real people work at these organizations, and it's involved. And I think it's a good look. Final question would be, so let's say someone's engaged in social media and they are posting on the regular and they're getting some likes and gaining some followers. What's a good metric by which to judge whether or not this is actually working out? Because likes doesn't seem to be likes are nice and commenting is nice, but it doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't fill the coffers, so to speak.
Yeah.
And there's an obvious one, of course, that it's worthwhile because we're getting fundraising. But are there any other ways to judge that this social media campaign you're engaged in has been a success or is being a success?
I think that there's just, unfortunately, a lot of anecdotal evidence and qualitative evidence that you can take. So like you said, if you're trying to accomplish something specific, where it's Giving Tuesday or it's your year end and you want to raise $10,000, you can easily measure that. But the challenge becomes, building a community, keeping in contact with our donors. Can we really measure that? Like if your goal is to keep your donors and supporters engaged and really interested in your mission and understanding what you do and really invested, then you have to put in the work before the next ask. So I think the way that you could measure it, you really have to measure it against your goals. Is it advocacy? Maybe it's signups. Maybe it is volunteers. Maybe you're doing a social media campaign to change hearts and minds. That's a really difficult one. The Human Rights Campaign in the United States did an entire social media campaign right before marriage equality was passed here that was hugely successful. They can't say it was because of us that marriage equality passed, but maybe it was. So really, a lot of it, I think, it's very hard to draw the straight lines. And that goes even back to what we talked about before, why people a lot of time think that it's not worthwhile. You can't necessarily translate this community building with every post into dollars and cents. I see it as putting investments in the bank. So every post, any story you share, any accomplishment, any statistic, anything of value that you're sharing with your audience is a deposit in the bank so that when you need to withdraw it, you have that goodwill, you have that affinity, you have that trust. So I struggle with social media metrics unless you are running a specific campaign where you need, specific KPIs. But a lot of it is just posting, and it's almost just like keeping up a friendship. You don't text your friend whenever you want something. You text them when you have something funny to share, or when you have a story. You text them when you have a question. You text them, when you want their opinion on something. So I kind of think of it as keeping up a friendship. Right. And it's not just going to be a one-time year thing when you can withdraw those deposits that you made.
Right. So yeah, and I guess then that that's an important conceptual distinction, isn't it? Is that when you're engaging in a social media strategy, that it's not just a means to an end, because
right.
It's not. No.
It can be the end in itself sometimes. Yeah. There's so much in my life, my career, that has happened because of my blog, my emails, my social media. I've been doing this for 10 years, and it's just, sometimes the days are very it's very hard. You think, oh, no one's reading, no one's looking, no one's paying attention, but then you'll get a client, then you'll get a speaking engagement, then you get a podcast interview, then you get a book deal. It really is a marathon and not a sprint, and it all adds up. I just think as long as you truly understand your audience and you're very consistent, you're just consistent. That doesn't necessarily mean every day, but your audience knows what to expect from you and they know they can count on you. Then that's how you really build that following that would miss you when you were gone. And I think that's the whole goal of all of this. Would people miss you? Would they notice that you were gone? And that can be challenging, but that can also be rewarding.
Right, Julia. Well, I think that's given us plenty to think about, plenty to chew on. In the meantime, if you'd like to do a bit of plugging away, let people know about any websites, books, things like that you'd like to direct people towards.
Sure. Well, I wrote a book this year. It just came out. It's how to build and mobilize your nonprofit social media community in 90 days. Mm-hmm. And you can find all of that information, my blog, my online courses, everything else on my website, which you gave before, jcsocialmarketing.com.
Okay. And just sort of related to the work you do, when is it a good time, or what are good circumstances for a nonprofit to contact somebody like you to say, come in and help us out with this because we don't know what we're doing?
I think anytime, really. And it's my job to evaluate if it's a good match, and it's my job to evaluate, the circumstances. So I've had nonprofits come to me from the very, very beginning stages. I've worked with national organizations that have been doing this for years that just really needed a set of new eyes on their campaign. So I think that if you're struggling, if you're looking for a little bit more clarity and confidence, I would encourage you to reach out. Even if you just have a question, send me an email, find me on Twitter. I'm always there. I'm not sharing pictures of my lunch, but sharing helpful resources. And if I can't do it, if I'm not the right person, I'll connect you with somebody that can.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to go away, try and implement a few of these things. We do YouTube and SoundCloud and podcasts, but
YouTube is great.
Yep, YouTube. I know YouTube. I'm familiar with it. It's like I say, it's these other ones I need to Instagram. I think there's potential there for us to have a visual aspect to it.
If you're doing YouTube, you could do IGTV. If you're doing long form video, you could just translate that to IGTV and put the little preview on Instagram. That's what a lot of YouTubers do.
Yeah, I think it's just laziness that's holding me back.
Just one more step, one more thing on the to-do list.
But we'll see how we crack on.
I hear you.
Maybe we can touch base again in a year or so and see how we're doing.
Oh, I'd love to. The whole world could have blown up by then. Who knows? But I would love that.
All right, Julia Campbell, thank you very much for joining me.